Hello and welcome to Fireside Chats with me, Dr. Peters. I was born and raised in New Hampshire, and I completed my PhD at the University of Glasgow. My research looks at the intellectual history of the US Constitution and how that history, philosophy, political theory, and constitutional law can help us better understand and address contemporary social and political issues. Today, I'd like to chat about popular sovereignty, how democracy works, and what gives me hope. Now, what inspires this chat is recent news of protesters in Minneapolis winning some concessions, a few Republicans crossing the aisle to vote against funding for ICE, in alignment with recent polls that illustrate that 60 or 70% of Americans disapprove of how immigration enforcement is being carried out. Now, what gives me hope in all of that is not that Democrats are winning or their policies are moving forward. Rather, it's that the American people are starting to gain a sense of themselves, find their voice, and find that that voice is powerful. They're starting to recognize that we, the people, are sovereign, and government is meant to be our tool or agent to protect and improve society. Or at least that's what James Wilson thought. James Wilson, one of our founders, who best articulated this founding idea of popular sovereignty, that we, the people, means that we get to decide how we're governed. Now, we've talked about Wilson quite a bit and his revolution principle, this idea that because the people are sovereign and thus government relies upon their consent for its legitimacy, they can change any aspect of their governance at any time and for any reason through a simple democratic vote. He also argued, based on some other foundational principles, that the chief end of government, its reason for existence, was to protect and improve the social life. And he hoped that these principles working in concert would commence a continuous progressive revolution in society and government, where society would improve, develop knowledge, and use that knowledge to improve their government. In this sense, government is the agent or tool of the people to fulfill this end. Now, Wilson's revolution principle provides a legal mechanism for change, but it raises the question in the modern era of how do the people actually force the government to act as their agent or tool instead of in their own vested interests. Many of the founders couldn't foresee super PACs, lobbyists, monopolies on media, and the influence of algorithms that shape how we understand our world. Wilson's theory has a few gaps about how we actually force our representatives to represent our will and get government to function as our agent or tool. Wilson thought that just as long as the people voted well and held their elected officials accountable, that it would work. It hasn't. And that's where the theory of another American thinker helps fill in this gap. John Dewey, better known for his philosophy of education, argued that a truly representative government is one where the people can force their representatives and government to act in their interests and in alignment with their will, rather than the representative's own personal interests or will. Now, he argued a key aspect of realizing this truly representative government was that the people had to have a sense of themselves as we, the sovereign people. We had to recognize ourselves as what he would term the public. To further fill out this idea of a truly representative government and the mechanism by which we, the people with this sense of ourselves, can actually force our government to do what we, the sovereign people, want it to. And that's the theory of Hannah Arendt, and particularly her understanding of the term power, and what she would argue is its opposite or inverse, violence. Hannah Arendt was a historian and political theorist that looked mainly at the rise and eventual fall of authoritarian regimes. And through her observations, she noted that power is the ability to act collectively, to act in concert. That power comes through consent and support. We empower leaders, we empower institutions, we empower governments through our consent and support. Now, when we remove that consent and support, we no longer respect those institutions and the rules and laws that they make, they start to lose power. And in her writings, she illustrated this through many of the independence and revolution movements in the post-World War II and post-Soviet era. Now, what she also notes from these observations is that violence is the opposite and inversely related to power. Violence can stop or silence power with a bullet, but it can't create it. It doesn't inspire collective action through consent and support. Rather, it attempts to force people into compliance and obedience. And Arendt notes that as regimes start to lose power, start to lose that consent and support that allows them to govern through power, they start to fill in the gap with violence. So as regimes start to use violence, it's a sign of their loss of power. And that use of violence also tends to undermine their power. Surprisingly, people do not like to be governed and don't like to consent to people who use fear, threat, and state violence to coerce them into acting and behaving in a certain way. It would seem, in the terms of our founders, that most people prefer liberty rather than tyranny. And I would argue we can see these theories playing out in these recent events. The American people finding their voice, whether it's in the songs that they're writing, the marches that they're going on, or simply the polling and the consensus that's forming, these are all signs that the people, Americans, are finding a sense of themselves, and that's leading to them finding their voice. And that voice has had power. Republicans have crossed party lines despite threats from party leadership. Our representatives in Congress are actually voting in line with what we, the people, want. They're not funding ICE and CBP. And Minneapolis and other cities are gaining some concessions, and their local legislatures are also passing legislation to protect their society, their community, from governance through threat and violence that ICE and CBP have been using. And while these victories seem small and not enough, they illustrate the power that we, the people, have when we work and pull collectively. And what I find even more hopeful is that this power is not primarily for resistance. Interestingly, Wilson's conception of democracy and Arendt's conception of power are actually creative and progressive forces. They're about building things, empowering people to fulfill our collective will, and as Wilson would say, primarily to protect and improve our society. And my hope is this newfound power will not only allow us to resist and persist through these dark times, but also fix and improve our country afterwards to create an America and an Americanness that we can all be proud of and benefits all of us, to form a government and hold it accountable to protect and improve our society. And that lesson, sadly, will be important moving forward. As Hannah Arendt's theory warns, as regimes lose power, they replace it with violence. And so likely as the current regime loses power, it will likely become more violent. However, while dangerous and scary, the increased use of violence is a sign that the regime or administration or government is in fact losing power. And I take that as some small hope. And what I hope this chat also helps reveal is why I keep asking those two questions about who we want to be and how we govern ourselves. Answering those questions, even if it's only just deciding it in your own mind, creates the core that allows for this power to form and be realized, for us to find our voice again and realize its power to change our country and our society for the better. And we've seen this before. Our country has done this before. It's this power in the ability to answer those questions that led to the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, women gaining the right to vote, our country's response to the Great Depression, where we empowered FDR to put forward the New Deal and make it work. It's what allowed us to help win the Second World War. And if we do that hard work of answering those questions and gaining a sense of ourselves as the public, as we, the sovereign people, we can not only resist what's going on right now and fix where things have gone wrong, but we can improve things and we can realize a far better future than many of us would have imagined even a few years ago. Because what it takes to realize that kind of a future, a kind of future that we all want, is that political will, that power. And I see that beginning to awaken in the American people. And that is what gives me hope. So for now, I'll leave you to ponder that, and I hope it brightens your day a wee bit. As always, feel free to ask questions, leave comments, and by all means, subscribe if you find content like this interesting, or even if you just find my voice nice to fall asleep to. My students would certainly vouch for that use. And with that, I hope you all have a great day.